Shabbat Shalom. I'll take a few minutes more than usual this week to make 4 comments on the return of Gilad Shalit. First, the Jewish family. We've seen Jewish peoplehood in action this week in all of its glory. For those of you who are with us on Yom Kippur, I spoke about this at length. For me, it is the central idea. My prime directive, my fundamental purpose here as your rabbi is to promote in you a greater appreciation of the family of the Jewish people. If any of you are around when it comes time for me to meet my Maker and you have to summarize my experience with you, there's no need to lengthen in words. I've given it to you. Just say this: He loved the Jewish people and labored to secure its future. That's it. That's enough. We believe in universal values. In fact, we were the ones who first articulated many of these values. But we see the universal through the particular. As we see the neighborhood through the eyes of our own family, so we see society through the eyes of the Jewish family. First and foremost, we are members of the Jewish people. We act as a family. We see ourselves as part of an extended family. We embrace fully the Talmudic dictum, Kol Yisrael Arevin Ze Bazeh. All Jews are responsible one for the other. It's why we mobilized to free Soviet Jewry when there were many others in the Soviet Union who were persecuted as well. Why the Soviet Jews? Why so much noise? Because we placed them at the forefront of international attention. We felt universal kinship with all of the oppressed in the Soviet Union, but we also felt specific family kinship with the Soviet Jews. That's why we mobilized to protect Israel. While there are many other nations threatened by anti-Western forces, why Israel? Why so much noise? Because we place Israel at the forefront of the world's attention. We feel universal kinship with all nations struggling to be free, but we also feel specific family kinship with fellow Jews. And it's why the world mobilized to free Gilad Shalit. When there are many other people illegally and immorally imprisoned, why Gilad Shalit? Why so much noise? Because we placed him at the forefront of the world's attention. We created the news that all of the world's international media felt was the main story of the day, the return of one Israeli soldier. We feel universal kinship with all of those who suffer the injustice of wrongful imprisonment, but we also feel specific family kinship with an Israeli soldier. And it's why, in the end, Israel made the deal. When Israelis thought of Gilad Shalit in the dungeon, they thought of their own sons in the dungeon. When they looked into the eyes of Aviva Shalit, Gilad's mother, they imagined themselves enveloped in her dungeon of despair, knowing that her son was still alive, buried alive, imprisoned in a silent tomb. When they looked into the eyes of Noam Shalit, Gilad's father, they imagined themselves in his noble and dignified pursuit of liberating his son. The Shalit's family's only consideration was to liberate their son. We would have done the same. Their job was not to figure out what was the appropriate ransom. That was the politician's job. The Shalit family's only task was to do everything in their power to bring their son home at any price. No price was too heavy. It's what we would have done as well. And in the end, because we would have done the same, and practically every Israeli family would have done the same, a huge majority of Israelis wanted to see Gilad Shalit home at practically any price. Israelis went into the deal with eyes wide open. 88% of Israelis agreed with the Prime Minister's decision, while at the same time, 82% believed that it would lead to more kidnappings. Israel's leaders managed to moderate the price somewhat, which is their role. But by all accounts, it was a preposterous price to pay. The opponents of the deal were right about that. Over 1,000 felons, many of them unrepentant murderers of the most savage, bestial nature, for one Israeli soldier. But Israeli leaders, too, could not look into the Shalit parents' eyes without thinking of their own children. Prime Minister Netanyahu, Defense Minister Barak, and many members of the Israeli cabinet who voted 26-3 in favor of this crazy deal. And practically the entire military leadership. They are the toughest of Israel's tough men. They are battle-hardened. Many come from the elite commando units. Netanyahu was a member of the elite unit, the most elite unit, the same unit that his brother Yoni Netanyahu famously led on the raid in Entebbe that took his life. Ehud Barak was the commander of this unit and the former Israeli chief of staff. These are tough guys. They melted, as did Yitzhak Rabin and also former chief of staff and all Israeli prime ministers. They all melted when they're confronted with the sufferings of the families. Those guys who are afraid of nothing on the battlefield couldn't look Aviva Shalit in the eye. They saw in her their own mothers. They imagined themselves bending down to listen to their own mothers, who would grab them by the collar and whisper in their ear, "Now you listen to me. Bring that boy home. For this you have been placed in leadership, to protect the Jewish people. Find a way to bring this boy home." And they did. They paid an enormous price. No one else in the world, no one, would have paid even 1/10 of this price. International leaders thought that their Israeli counterparts had lost their minds. And they brought the Shalit son home, because by then he had become the son of the entire nation. That's what Jewish peoplehood means. You're part of this people. We're keen to point out our flaws. We don't need our opponents and our enemies to point out our weaknesses. We are great at that ourselves. We have a never-ending argument with ourselves about all of our flaws and all of our weaknesses. But to know ourselves, we must also be conscious of our greatness. We are the envy of the world. Your child is like my child. Really? It's not just lip service. We should thank the Almighty God for the privilege of being part of this aggravating, frustrating, opinionated, strong-willed, but glorious people, unique in the annals of human civilization. 2, the value of life. Jews are in love with life. We do not aspire to die. We do not value martyrdom over life. We do not anxiously await our passage to eternity. This world is the arena of life. We struggle in this world to make this world better. We have one chance at life, now. Our enemies consider this a great weakness, our Achilles heel. In many ways it is. They know us well enough by now to know our weaknesses. We value human life. It is life above all, not martyrdom, that motivates us. The thought of unnecessary suffering drives us crazy. So they can simply kidnap an Israeli and wait for the ransom to be paid. They know eventually it will be paid. Already the crowds in Gaza shouted, "We demand another Shalit." There's still 5,000 Palestinian murderers in jail. It's not a new pattern in Jewish history. It was common throughout our history that Jews were kidnapped and held for ransom, which in turn gave rise to a huge literature in rabbinic Judaism. The rabbis insisted, redeem the captive. To save a life is to save an entire world. Captivity is worse than starvation or even death, they said. Using communal funds to redeem the captive takes precedence even over supporting and funding the poor. On the one hand, it is a weakness, a terrible weakness. On the other hand, it is the secret of our strength. This essential Jewish unity, seen most profoundly in Israel, the state of the Jewish people, is the core conviction of Jewish identity. You do not abandon a comrade in the field. You do not rest until you have brought him home, dead or alive. Israelis have exchanged hundreds of prisoners for corpses. Israel's enemies properly identified this weakness. There will be more kidnappings and more deaths. Some of those released this week will return to terror, and Israelis will pay with their lives. Hamas has said many times, we will defeat you because you love life and we love martyrdom. This is your fatal flaw. But they misperceive and misunderstand this flaw. That's the reason they lose war after war and will never defeat Israel. This flaw contains an essential strength. We love life more than death, and love of life, demonstrated in all its complicated glory this week, in the end will always defeat love of death. Given a fighting chance, freedom will always defeat tyranny. 3. We've received a good picture this week of who Israel's enemies really are. Do you see the pictures of Gilad Shalit? He was emaciated. He was pale. He was deprived of vitamin D due to 5 years of no sunlight. He could barely walk. It's not that Israeli prisons are a picnic, but did you see the pictures of the Palestinians released? They were healthy and well-groomed. They were energetic, singing and dancing and celebrating, full of fighting spirits. Some of them received university degrees in prison. They were visited regularly by relatives, friends, human rights groups, and the Red Cross. And who were those released Palestinians? All of them were felons, and many of them were murderers. 280 of them were serving life sentences. Do yourselves a favor and go online and look at these people. Read what they did. The terrorist who drove a suicide bomber to a Jerusalem pizzeria that killed 15 people and wounded 140. She said this week she's proud of what she did. She would do it again. The terrorist who drove a bus off a cliff on the Jerusalem-Tel Aviv highway, killing 16 Israeli people. The terrorist who used a bus to run over a group of women soldiers, 8 died and 26 were wounded. The terrorist who plotted to bomb a Jerusalem cafe, 12 were killed and 54 were maimed. The list goes on and on. Look at it for yourselves. Collectively, they murdered over 550 Israelis and maimed hundreds more. They were greeted as conquering heroes in Gaza and the West Bank. President Abbas, considered the moderate there, praised them as freedom fighters and holy warriors for the sake of God and the homeland. See, that's what's wrong with Palestinian society and why there cannot be peace at this time. It's not that there are not good people there. There are. It's not that there are not peaceful people there. There are. But there are elements in Palestinian society that make it impossible to have peace. If it were Americans, we would walk away in shame at the deeds of these people, not celebrate them. Do yourselves a favor. Go online and read the Hamas Charter. You will find there not a Declaration of Independence and not a Bill of Rights. You will find an anti-Semitic screed praising those who seek to annihilate the Jews. Some of the leaders and some of the newspapers and some of the diplomats this week, unfortunately, they have it all wrong. Somehow the New York Times found a way to blame Netanyahu this week. He reached a deal with Hamas on Shalit, they said, so why not on all of the other outstanding matters? We saw this parade of diplomats proclaiming their hopes that this is the beginning of a thaw in the relationship between Israel and Hamas, which could be used as encouragement to return to negotiations that Abbas, not Netanyahu, has boycotted. And Hamas considers anathema because even to agree to negotiation implies recognition of the Jewish state. They don't realize that this deal was an Israeli surrender to terrorism. Anything to get the boy out of the dungeon. Of course, there were political factors. Everything is political. We expect politicians to take politics into account when they make decisions. But there is an inability to grasp that Jewish unity and Israeli solidarity is also political. It is the main strategic asset that Israel has. That's why Netanyahu made a deal with the devil. It was a tactical defeat from the man who preached never to succumb to terrorists for humanitarian purposes and for internal Israeli cohesion. It doesn't advance peace one iota. As a progressive who wants peace, I say this with great regret. It does not advance peace. To the contrary, it weakened the Palestinian Authority, strengthened Hamas, and provided another vivid reminder to Israelis who they are dealing with. 4, finally, Gilad Shalit. My hope is that Gilad Shalit lives a long, fruitful, and satisfying life. I cannot even imagine what 5 years in isolation and depravity did to him. He has many people in his corner. His loving and noble family, friends, doctors, specialists, the entire country, and the Jewish world. May all this allow him to recover and overcome the inevitable wounds that will never fully heal. This week, Jews around the world began reading the Torah anew with the opening passages of the book of Genesis. We read, "Veyatzar et ha'adam betzalmo, betzelem Elohim bara oto." And God made man in God's image. We have seen the best and the worst of humanity this week. We have witnessed savagery, depravity, and bestiality. But we have also seen the collective strength of a people insistent that we human beings are made in the image of God and must value above all else this one precious life that we have been granted. Shabbat Breshit reminds us that as we can start the Torah again, finding new meaning in each verse, so we can start our lives again, finding new meaning in each day. This is Shabbat Breshit for the Shalit family, the first Shabbat of freedom, an opportunity to start over, a chance to find new meaning in each day. We read in the opening passages of the book of Genesis that when God created the world, God pronounced the following judgment day by day. Vayar Elohim ki tov. And God saw that it was good. But upon completion of the 6th day, after the creation of human beings, the Bible does not state, and God saw that it was good. Rather, the Bible states, Vayar Elohim et kol asher asa v'hinei tov me'od. And God saw all that had been created, and behold, it was very good. The rabbis tell us that the Bible phrased it in this way because the judgment on this last creation, human beings, cannot be made by God alone. It ultimately depends on human beings themselves. They must pronounce the verdict, Vehine tov me'od, and behold, it is very good. May Gilad Shalit live a long, healthy, and prosperous life, a life filled with all of the joy of living. He's been granted new opportunities. May he reach ripe old age, and one day, many, many decades from now, when looking at the momentousness of his life and recalling what was, may he be able to proclaim, Vehine tov me'od, and behold, it has been very good. Amen.